Max Hartman was sitting at his massive oak desk in the office. The sun's rays penetrated through the windows, reflecting on his computer screen. Max was a tall man with dark hair and deep brown eyes. At 39, he looked younger thanks to his toned figure and neat haircut. He was known as one of the best lawyers in the city, always confident and determined. Scrolling through the email, Max stopped at an email from Gavin Tate, his wife Rachel's boss. The subject of the letter was mysterious. An offer. Max frowned and began to read the message. Max, I would like to discuss an important matter with you and Rachel. Offer. Can we meet for dinner this week? Max felt a slight pang of anxiety. Rachel, his wife, has changed in recent months. Frequent late returns home and quiet phone conversations aroused his suspicions. He slowly typed in the answer. Of course, Gavin. Named the time and place. Max's wife, Rachel, who was 37 years old, was a slender woman with long brown hair and green eyes. She worked as a manager at a large company where Gavin was her immediate supervisor. There has always been passion and trust in Max and Rachel's relationship, but recently something has changed. Max could feel it all over his skin. 3 days later, Max, Rachel, and Gavin met in the private room of one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city. Gavin was a man of medium height with graying hair and piercing blue eyes. He was a successful businessman, but there was always a hidden cunning in his eyes. Max, I'm sure you're wondering why I called you. Gavin began with a grin. Surprised. Rather interested. Max replied, gritting his teeth. Gavin smiled and continued. Over the past few months, Rachel and I have become very close. We want to have a baby, and I'm willing to pay handsomely for your consent. Gavin's words hit Max like lightning. He felt the blood drain from his face. Do you want my wife to give birth to your child? What is it? He asked, trying to keep his voice normal. Rachel looked up from the table, her eyes full of tears. Max, please let me explain. Not now, Rachel. Max interrupted, raising his hand. I'll give you an answer later, he said, turning to Gavin. There was a deathly silence in the car on the way home. Max gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. When they finally arrived home, Max abruptly stopped the car and got out without waiting for Rachel. She hurried after him, feeling the ground give way beneath her feet. Max burst into the house and went straight to the living room where he finally couldn't stand it. What the hell is Rachel? Stop it, he shouted, turning to her. Do you want to have a child with this bastard? How could you betray me like that? Rachel covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. Max, you have to understand. Understand what? He growled, his voice full of pain and anger. That my wife is cheating on me with the boss. It's unbearable. Rachel, trying to collect her thoughts, came closer. Max, it's not that easy. I'm confused. Max shook his head, his dark eyes were cold. Confused. Is that all you can say? He stepped closer to her, his tall stature and sturdy figure seeming even more imposing at this moment. Do you think you can just explain it? Rachel, sobbing, tried to explain. Gavin, we just became close. I didn't want it to happen like this. Max felt his anger rising. Have you become close to him? Is that all you have? I trusted you, Rachel. I thought we were a team. Rachel didn't know what to say. She stood before him, defenseless and exhausted. Max, please give me a chance to explain myself. Max turned away, his shoulders shaking with rage. Not now, Rachel. I can't listen to this. He headed for his office, feeling the walls closing in around him. He needed time to process everything that had happened. When the door closed behind him, Rachel remained standing in the living room, hugging herself. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, but she knew that no words could undo what she had done. Max was sitting in his office, lost in heavy thoughts. He remembered all the times Rachel had been by his side, all the promises and dreams they had shared. Now it all seemed like a lie. He had to find a way to rebuild his life, but first he had to deal with the betrayal that tore his heart apart. Max was sitting at his desk in his office, surrounded by a pile of documents. His eyes were full of determination, and his face expressed fierce concentration. He wasn't going to just let go of Rachel and Gavin's betrayal. He decided to take revenge. A plan began to form in his mind. Snatches of conversations and rumors about Gavin Tate surfaced in his mind. Max knew that Gavin didn't always act honestly in business. It was his weakness, and Max intended to use it against him. Max picked up the phone and dialed an old friend's number. Kevin Rand, a former policeman, owed him. The phone rang, and after a few rings, a familiar voice was heard on the other end. "Kevin, this is Max," he began, trying to keep his voice calm. "Max? What happened? You haven't called me in ages," Kevin replied, sounding tired but interested. "I need your help," Max continued. "Do you know Gavin Tate? This rich rascal?" "Of course I do," Kevin replied. "What has he done this time?" Max was silent for a moment, considering his words. "I need everything you can find on him. Tax evasion, fraud, any illegal transactions. Anything that can be used against him." Kevin sighed. "Are you sure you want to do this, Max? People like Tate don't joke." Max clenched his fist. "Don't worry about me, Kev. Just find the evidence." "Okay, I'll see what I can do. But be careful," Kevin warned before hanging up the phone. Max lowered the phone and closed his eyes, feeling his anger mix with determination. He knew that this path would be dangerous, but he had no choice. A few days have passed. Max wasted no time poring over financial reports and exploring the dark corners of the internet. He was looking for any clue, any weak spot that could be the beginning of the end for Gavin. Finally, one of the evenings brought results. His phone rang, and Kevin's name popped up on the screen. "Max, I have something for you," Kevin said. "You should come and see for yourself." The next day, Max met Kevin at their old favorite cafe. Kevin handed him a thick envelope. "That's all I found," he said, looking at Max seriously. "This is not a joke. There are both tax fraud and corporate fraud. Everything is documented." Max took the envelope, feeling his heart accelerate. "Thank you, Kevin. Be careful, Max," Kevin said, looking into his eyes. "Gavin is a dangerous man." Max nodded, getting up from the table. "I know, but he went too far." When Max returned home, he locked himself in his office and began examining the contents of the envelope. There were documents, photos, and even audio recordings. All of this was enough to destroy Gavin. Max felt that his plan was beginning to take shape. He was ready to act. He called Rachel into the office. Her face was pale and tired. She knew what she had done and was aware of the consequences. Max dropped the envelope on the table in front of her. "This is all the evidence against your dear Gavin," he said coldly. Rachel paled even more when she saw the contents of the envelope. "How did you get this?" "It doesn't matter," he replied, his voice icy. "What matters is what I'm going to do with this evidence." Rachel looked at him with horror in her eyes. "Max, please don't." Max leaned towards her, his eyes burning with anger. "You're going to help me or you're going to join Gavin behind bars." Rachel, choked with fear and guilt, just nodded. She knew she had no other choice. Max was adamant. Max was standing in front of Rachel with an envelope in his hands. His eyes were cold and determined. He knew what needed to be done. "Do you understand what I'm going to do?" "What is it?" he asked, looking straight into her green eyes. Rachel nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Yes, Max. You have to help me," he said softly but firmly. "This is our only chance." Rachel lowered her head. She knew she had no choice. "What do you want me to do?" Max put the envelope on the table and opened it. "We're going to Gavin's. You're going to play your part. Make sure he believes that we agree with his proposal." Rachel sighed and nodded. "Good. I'll do it." A few days later, they headed to Gavin's house. It was a huge mansion with a high fence and a guard at the gate. Max and Rachel drove in silence. Finally, they stopped at the gate. The guard checked them and let them in. Gavin met them in the living room of the mansion. A smug grin lit up his face. "Max, Rachel, it's good to see you." Max nodded and sat down. Rachel followed him, her hands shaking slightly. Gavin sat down across from them, his blue eyes studying their faces intently. "So, have you thought about my offer?" Gavin asked, his voice confident and relaxed. Max nodded. "Yes, we thought about it. We're ready to discuss the details." Gavin grinned and leaned forward. "Great, let's talk about numbers." Rachel, holding back her fear, began to speak. Gavin, we want to make sure that everything is going to be fair. We don't want anything to go wrong. Gavin nodded. Of course, Rachel. I understand your concerns. I am ready to offer you a considerable sum. While Gavin was talking, Max discreetly pulled out a small recording device and hid it under a stack of books on the table. His heart was pounding, but he tried to keep a calm expression on his face. Can we discuss the terms? Max asked, looking directly at Gavin. Gavin smiled. Of course. Let's get down to business. They talked for about an hour. Gavin explained his offers and guarantees in detail. Max and Rachel nodded and asked questions, playing their part. Finally, when all the conditions were discussed, Gavin held out his hand to Max. Looks like we have a deal, he said with a grin. Max shook his hand. That's right. When they got home, Max went to the office first. He took out a recording device and connected it to the computer. The recording was clear, and Gavin's every word was clearly audible. Rachel entered the office and stopped at the door. Max turned to her, his face expressing calm determination. Now we're watching his world crumble. The next day, Max sent copies of the recording to several journalists and the police. Soon, news of Gavin Tate's dirty deeds appeared on the front pages of newspapers and in news releases. Tax evasion, fraud, illegal transactions, all this became known to the public. Gavin tried to deny the charges, but the evidence was incontrovertible. Reporters besieged his home and office, demanding answers. Gavin's company began to lose sponsors and clients. His world began to crumble. Max looked at all this with satisfaction. He knew that this was just the beginning. Gavin will get what he deserves, and Rachel will be a part of this downfall. Max and Rachel were sitting in the living room watching the news on TV. Reporters stood outside Gavin's house, covering his arrest. Gavin was let out in handcuffs, and cameras captured every moment. Rachel was sitting next to Max, her eyes full of tears. Max, I'm so sorry about all this. Max looked at her, his face was calm. This is the end, Rachel. Now you know what happens when you betray me. But now we have to be ready for Gavin to try to defend himself. He won't give up without a fight. Rachel took a deep breath. What do you want me to do? You'll be there when I need you. Max said, be ready for challenges. That evening they met again in his office. Max laid out in front of him all the documents he had on Gavin. We have to be ready for anything, he said, looking at Rachel. Rachel nodded. I understand, Max. I'll do whatever it takes. The next day they went to the office together. Reporters surrounded the building, trying to get comments. Max and Rachel pushed through the crowd without answering questions. When they entered the building, Max headed for his office. He knew Gavin would try to contact him, and he was not mistaken. The phone on his desk rang. Max picked up the phone. Max Hartman, he said. Max, this is Gavin. The voice on the other end was strained. We have to talk. We have nothing to talk about, Gavin, Max replied. You got what you deserved. Gavin was silent for a moment. Max, you don't understand. This is not the end. I can still get out of this situation. Max chuckled. Try it, Gavin. But I'm sure you won't succeed. Gavin hung up the phone. Max put the phone back down and turned to Rachel. He's still hoping to escape. Rachel sighed. What should we do now? We will continue to put pressure on him, Max replied. He must understand that he has no way out. A few days later, Max and Rachel were watching the news. Reporters were reporting new evidence against Gavin. His company was losing sponsors and clients. Stocks were falling. Soon the news came that Gavin had been arrested on new charges. He was led out of the office in handcuffs, and the cameras captured this moment. Max stared at the screen with a sense of satisfaction. Rachel was sitting next to him, her eyes full of tears. Max, I'm so sorry about all this. Max looked at her, his face was calm. This is the end, Rachel. Now you know what happens when you betray me. Rachel nodded, her face pale. She knew her life would never be the same. Gavin Tate sat in a prison cell, pondering his mistakes. He knew that all was lost. Max Hartman won this battle. Gavin realized that his attempts to escape were futile. Max and Rachel returned home feeling like they could finally start a new life. They knew that there were still many difficulties ahead, but together they could cope with any challenges. Max was sure that their life would be different now. That's how the story ended. Leave your opinion in the comments about this story. We will be interested to know what you think. Also, don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to our channel. That way you won't miss new exciting stories. Good luck to you.